Picture an elderly woman standing on a wooden platform in the Forum Romanum, her feet marked with white chalk like livestock, a placard hanging from her neck that lists every defect her body has accumulated through decades of servitude. Behind her, younger women are being snatched up by eager buyers, but she stands there ignored as men walk past her with the same disinterest they'd show a broken cartwheel. This was the reality for aging female slaves in ancient Rome, and what happened to them when their bodies could no longer produce profit reveals a level of calculated cruelty that makes modern horror films look quaint. Between 5 and 10 million human beings lived as slaves across the Roman Empire, and women comprised a massive portion of this enslaved population. Unlike male slaves who were valued primarily for physical labor, enslaved women faced a unique double exploitation. They were simultaneously laborers whose productivity declined with age and beings valued for their reproductive capacity, which also diminished over time. Roman law classified them as property with no personal rights whatsoever, and when the years stripped away their usefulness, Roman society revealed its darkest calculations about human worth. The moment an enslaved woman's productivity began to wane, the economic equation that governed her existence transformed entirely. Roman masters approached the health of their slaves through pure financial logic. A young enslaved woman in her productive years might receive basic medical attention, not because her master cared about her suffering, but because maintaining her capacity to work protected his investment. The agricultural writer Columella, writing in the 1st century, recommended specific food rations for slaves based entirely on their output, treating human sustenance as carefully calibrated fuel for labor machines. But age shattered this arrangement completely. When strength faded and productivity declined, the financial logic that once justified even minimal care evaporated like morning mist over the Tiber. Cato the Elder, that paragon of Roman virtue, embodied this ruthless pragmatism with disturbing clarity. According to Plutarch's biography, Cato treated slaves like beasts of burden, using them to the absolute limit, and then driving them off and selling them when they grew old. Plutarch himself, writing centuries later, couldn't hide his revulsion at this practice, noting that it marked a thoroughly ungenerous nature that recognized no bond between human beings except raw necessity. But here's the truly sickening part. Some masters, unwilling to bear even the minimal expense of caring for elderly or sick slaves, simply abandoned them like broken furniture. By the mid-1st century, this practice had become so widespread that it demanded imperial intervention, which tells you everything about how normalized such cruelty had become. Tiber Island, home to a temple of Aesculapius, the healing god, became an actual dumping ground where masters left slaves they deemed too expensive to treat. Imagine the bitter irony of being abandoned at a healing temple, left to die in the shadow of a god who supposedly cared about suffering. Women who had spent decades serving their masters, who had cooked their meals and raised their children and cleaned their homes until their bodies broke, found themselves cast out onto this island, expected to either recover on their own or perish conveniently out of sight. Emperor Claudius finally addressed this horror around 50 CE, decreeing that slaves abandoned when sick or elderly would be granted freedom if they survived. The law further stipulated that masters who chose to kill such slaves, rather than abandon them, would face charges of murder. But think about what this legislation actually reveals. The very need for such a law confirmed how common the practice had become, and the specific provision about killing versus abandoning suggests that masters were weighing these options as equally viable alternatives. Should I abandon her or just kill her outright? That was an actual calculation Roman slave owners performed. For aging female slaves, medical abandonment carried particular cruelties that male slaves didn't face in quite the same way. Women who had served as wet nurses, raising their master as children at their own breast, while their own offspring were sold away to distant estates, received absolutely no gratitude when age diminished their usefulness. those who had worked until their bodies literally broke from years of grinding grain, hauling endless buckets of water, up flights of stairs, or standing at looms until their spines curved and their fingers gnarled, found themselves cast out precisely when infirmity made survival most precarious. The woman who had nursed a Roman child through infancy, who had sung lullabies and wiped tears and been the closest thing to a mother the child ever knew, discovered in her old age that none of that service mattered. The moment her body could no longer produce value, she became disposable waste. And here's what makes it even more grotesque. This wasn't considered cruel by Roman standards. This was just sound economic management, the kind of practical thinking that successful Romans prided themselves on. Cato the Elder wasn't viewed as a monster by his contemporaries. He was admired as a model of Roman virtue, a man who understood how to maximize profit and minimize waste. The fact that his waste happened to be human beings who had served him faithfully for decades was irrelevant to the accounting. When abandonment seemed too legally risky or socially complicated, Roman masters had another option that was somehow even more degrading. They could sell their aging slaves at the markets that operated throughout the empire with the same casual brutality that other markets traded livestock. Rome itself maintained two major slave markets, one near the Temple of Castor in the Forum, another at the Septa Julia in the Campus Martis. These commercial centers trafficked in human beings with the same mundane efficiency that other markets traded cattle or grain. The sale of elderly slaves operated under specific regulations, but these regulations were designed entirely to protect buyers, not the enslaved. The Edict of the Aediles required sellers to disclose any diseases or defects that might diminish a slave's capacity to work. For aging women, this meant public proclamation of their declining worth. The placards hung around their necks detailed every chronic ailment, every sign of reduced strength, every year that had accumulated on their exhausted bodies. Sellers presented them openly on raised platforms so potential buyers could inspect them thoroughly, checking their teeth like horses, looking for signs of illness, assessing exactly how much labor could still be extracted before they collapsed entirely. According to Diocletian's price edict from 301 CE, which set maximum prices across the empire, female slaves commanded lower prices than males, even in their prime years. The edict valued skilled male slaves at the equivalent of 3 tons of wheat, while skilled females reached only 2.5 tons. For elderly women past their productive peak, values plummeted to almost nothing. Some masters, desperate to recoup any value whatsoever from aging slaves, would doctor them up to appear younger, using cosmetics and forced posture to deceive buyers into paying marginally better prices. It's a uniquely Roman form of fraud, selling an exhausted elderly woman as though she were merely middle-aged, hoping the buyer wouldn't notice until after the transaction was complete. The reality facing these women was absolutely grim. Buyers weren't looking for humans to care for. They were hunting for bargains, for the cheapest possible labor they could extract before disposal became necessary. An elderly female slave might end up purchased by someone operating a mill or workshop, where brutal labor would finish what age had started. Others were sold to establishments where their remaining strength was exploited under conditions so harsh and degrading that even other Romans occasionally commented on it. The goal was always the same: extract whatever small profit remained from a human body that had already given everything it had to give. Cato the Elder, that charming exemplar of Roman values we met earlier, actually recommended in his writings on agriculture that masters should sell old slaves along with worn-out oxen and broken tools. He literally categorized aging human beings alongside damaged equipment. When Plutarch later challenged this practice, observing that even old draft animals deserved care after years of service, he was highlighting a moral failing at the absolute heart of Roman slavery. The system had achieved something remarkable in its horror. It had completely erased human dignity beneath property considerations. An ox that had pulled a plow for 20 years warranted more consideration than a woman who had served faithfully for the same duration, because at least the ox hadn't been expected to smile while doing it. Even when not sold or abandoned, aging female slaves experienced absolutely no respite from exploitation. Roman law granted masters nearly unlimited authority over their property, and that authority extended to extracting labor until the moment of death. Women who spent their youth in domestic service found their workload entirely undiminished by age. Those who had served as kitchen workers continued hauling water and tending fires, regardless of aching joints or failing eyesight. Former hairdressers and personal attendants found themselves reassigned to cruder, more physically demanding tasks as age stripped away the qualities that once made them valuable for delicate work. The textile workshops that employed thousands of enslaved women showed absolutely no mercy to those whose fingers grew stiff with arthritis or whose vision dimmed with cataracts. You couldn't see the loom properly anymore? Not their problem. Your hands shook too badly to thread the needle? Work faster or face punishment. Agricultural estates proved particularly merciless in this regard. Women who labored in the fields from dawn until darkness faced the exact same demands in their later years, their aging bodies pushed to match the output of slaves half their age. When an enslaved woman could no longer meet her quotas, punishment followed with mechanical inevitability. Roman masters employed an extensive range of punishments to compel obedience and maintain productivity. Flogging remained the standard response to perceived laziness or insufficient output. Branding marked repeat offenders or those who dared attempt escape. The cruelty extended into every single aspect of their existence with a thoroughness that is almost impressive in its evil. Cato the Elder deliberately fostered conflict among his slaves, believing that harmony among them posed a threat to his control. He charged fixed fees for male slaves to spend private time with female slaves, monetizing even their most intimate interactions. After dinner parties, he ordered the flogging of any slave who had shown the slightest lapse in service, regardless of their age or decades of faithful work. One slightly warm wine cup, one moment's delay in clearing a plate, and the whip came out. For aging women who had endured decades of this exploitation, the final years brought no dignity whatsoever. Those who collapsed from exhaustion might be abandoned on Tiber Island. Those who dared speak of their suffering faced punishment for ingratitude. Those who could no longer perform their assigned tasks discovered that a lifetime of service meant absolutely nothing against the cold arithmetic of present utility. And here's the most disturbing part of all this systematic cruelty. The Romans who abandoned sick slaves, who sold elderly women at market like damaged goods, who extracted labor from aging bodies until they literally collapsed and died, were not monsters operating outside their society's norms. They were respected Roman citizens acting entirely within legal and social frameworks that their culture not only accepted, but actively celebrated. These weren't the actions of sadistic outliers. This was standard operating procedure, recommended by Rome's most admired agricultural writers and practiced by men held up as moral exemplars. The legislation that Emperor Claudius felt compelled to enact tells us that abandoning sick and elderly slaves had become so routine that it required specific imperial intervention to address. And even then, the practice likely continued in modified forms because the economic incentives remained entirely unchanged.